We are very honored to present an open conversation with Glen Svensson, who is from Australia originally, but he's been practicing and studying Buddhism for 20 years, if not more, I think. And he's also been studying 7 years program in Lama Tsongkhapa Institute in Italia, in Pomaya. And he's been teaching from 2005. He's been teaching in Buddhist centers in Australia, Europe, India, the philosophy of Buddhism and meditations for beginners and intermediate level. And we had the opportunity to invite him to our conversation of open heart, and he gladly, and thank you so much for receiving this. And also in my personal side, I can say that Glen has been my first teacher for Buddhism. Then I stumbled upon Tushita almost 7 years ago, and I was
Mine
fortunate
first
enough.
as well.
Yeah. So we were fortunate enough to have him as our first teacher, and thank you so much for receiving the invitation and also for being such a wonderful teacher. Really, I mean, one of the things that Glen is known about is being able to present a very complex material in a way that people like me can understand. So thank you so much for this. Yeah. So sorry. So Glen, if you can tell us, how did you stumble upon Buddhism? You stumbled upon Buddhism. How did you get into Buddhism? What was the thing that attracts you more, and you find, something that at the end you dedicate all your life to? So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thanks, Maya. I think my upbringing was pretty normal, certainly in Australian standards. I went to school there. I went to university in Australia. I have Bachelor of Science in IT. I worked a number of 3 or 4 years in IT in Australia, in Brisbane, and then did the Australian thing of sort of going traveling. And so I headed overseas and did a little bit of traveling through Asia, and ended up in Europe and managed to get a job in IT, first in Germany for a year, and then I was working in Switzerland in IT. And I think and by that time I'd sort of discounted religion as a valid path, mainly because I only had exposure to Christianity, and some of the things I heard in Christianity didn't seem very logical to me. And so I sort of just did the normal career thing and ended up in Switzerland working in IT. And in hindsight, I think I was very lucky to do that, because many people in their lives in the modern world aspire to the good life, want to get a good career, make lots of money, have a lot of wealth and prestige and so forth. And so we're looking externally for a source of happiness. And many people have never really achieved that. And they often feel like, well, the reason I'm not so happy is I just didn't get enough money or good enough career or enough prestige and so forth. So they tend to struggle their entire life looking for that, not really getting it. And that's why they often think they're not really happy. And then usually when they come to retirement years, then their minds start to shift in terms of what really makes us happy and what doesn't. And I think I was very fortunate that in my 20s, I was in Switzerland, and basically overnight, I got all of these things that people chase after and never really get their entire lives. I had a very good job. I was driving a BMW. I was going skiing on the weekend. I was earning lots of money, eating at nice restaurants, all of this sort of stuff. And for about a year or 18 months or so forth, it was fine. It was fun. It was new, exciting, interesting. But then after about 18 months of getting this stuff easily that most people struggle to find in their life, I thought, is that it? That's all that life has to offer, some sort of fleeting pleasure that actually after a while just becomes quite boring. And I became completely depressed. And I thought, well, there must be something else to life than this. I managed to struggle on for a couple more years there, trying to sort of shift my perspective, but by and large, I wasn't very satisfied with the material world, you know, all this sort of stuff. And then eventually I just decided I got to make a change. I got to get out of here and try and find something else. And so I quit and ended up then back in Australia, and decided at least I didn't want to have some desk job. And so then I sort of went uh, up to Cairns, where my sister was living in the tropics in Queensland. And I thought this is a nice place, and I wanted to do something outdoors. And so then I became a dive instructor and was teaching people scuba diving on the Barrier Reef, which was interesting. But actually the most joy I got out of it was actually, you know, this diving was quite nice and that, but it was hard work. But the joy I really got out of that was, you know, teaching people to dive and opening up whole new experiences for people. So that already was a bit of a shift in terms of not what we can get, but what we can bring to the world. So already something tweaked there. But then I decided I wanted to do a bit more traveling and discover a little bit more in the world. And so I ended up doing a lot of traveling through Asia, a lot of Asian countries. And in a lot of those countries, they're very strongly influenced by religion. And so what I did before I went to the country was pick up a book about that religion of the country, and understand a little bit, to try and understand the way people think in those countries. So, you know, I read about Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, Judaism, all of these different religions. And from an ethical viewpoint, they all basically say the same thing: don't kill, steal, lie, and so forth. But from the philosophical side of things, there was quite a diversity. And sometimes I was sort of scratching my head a little bit and thinking, well, I don't really understand that. And then eventually I picked up a book on Buddhism, because I was going into, I think, Nepal at the time. And it just made sense to me, the book. It was basically based, I think, on the Four Noble Truths. And it was just logical and made sense. And so my rational mind thought, wow, there's something here that could be of interest. And so, but then it took me another couple of years before I went back to Australia, and still didn't really find a new direction in my life, and thought, no, I have to really do something here. I have to go and do a course on Buddhism to investigate further whether there's something there that could help me in my life. And cut a long story short, I ended up doing a 10-day introduction to Buddhism course at Tushita Meditation Center in Dharamsala. And immediately connected and felt I need to investigate this further. And so that same year in 95, I think that was, I ended up at Copan, did the November course, went back to Australia, hoping that this could give me a new direction in life. But again, nothing much happened, because all I had was some intellectual ideas, but nothing was sort of changing in my life. And so I decided to go back again in 96 to Copan, do the November course again, got a little bit deeper into Buddhism there, and then found myself back in Australia again. And then I really wanted to sort of use these ideas in my life, find some different sort of job I could use some of these ideas for a new direction in my life, but nothing really I was not finding anything that I could really relate to or get into. And at that time I was there in Australia thinking, what can I do with myself? And I actually got a postcard from one of the ladies I was traveling with after the Copan course the year before. And she said, guess what? I'm signing up for the master's program in Italy. And I thought, oh, I'd sort of heard about that when I was in India. And so I investigated, and within a week I'd signed up and was on my way to Italy. And so then I ended up spending 7 years in Italy doing this master's program. But to be honest, I initially hesitated because I knew I wanted to immerse myself much more in Buddhism, but 7 years was like, wow, that's a really long time. So basically I committed to myself that I'd go for at least 2 years and see how we go, and then ended up doing the whole program. And the master's program, the main purpose from FPMT side was to give people, Westerners, a training so they could really be much more qualified teachers, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, in Geluk School of Tibetan Buddhism. And so then from that 7-year master's program, I did about a year of retreat after that. And again, then I found myself back in Australia looking for a place to sort of be resident teacher in Australia, but no one was particularly interested at that time in a resident teacher. And so I was sitting there thinking, what should I do? And then I thought, well, I haven't been in India for a while. I know that both Tushita and Root Institute are often looking for teachers. So I hopped on a plane and ended up in India at Bodh Gaya, and went to Root Institute and ran a few courses there, introduction courses, and then the SBC of Tushita at the time, Kumpen, who was still not a nun then, she was there and she said, oh, why don't you come up to Tushita and run some courses? And so then the following, I think it was March or so, I ended up at Tushita. I think that was in 2008, and ran some 10-day introduction courses at Tushita. And then basically that for a number of years, that was my cycle between Bodh Gaya in the winter and then in the spring and autumn in Tushita, running courses, and then a bit over the monsoon, trying to find a place out of the monsoon. Because in those days, Tushita weren't running the 10-day courses in the monsoon anyway. And so I did that for a number of years, and then I spent more time at Tushita, and then less time in Bodh Gaya. And then for about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to base myself in Europe, because I was starting to do more and more things in Europe, various retreats and so forth, because there also was a lack of qualified teachers, I think, in Europe. And so I moved more into Europe. I was still going to Tushita. And then also I was doing a little bit in North America, in the US, running some stuff there, and also a little bit in Australia. So I was sort of running around doing lots of retreats and courses, and then got involved with Alan Wallace as well, and been helping out in his 8-week retreats that he's running. Now he's running them at in Istituto Lama Tsongkhapa in Italy, although this year, of course, was due to COVID, was online. And so due to COVID, then I had found myself back here in Australia, and I've been running a lot of online stuff for the last 9 months here in Australia. So that's a little bit about my history.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Glenn, in your story, so many people who encounter Buddhism, many of us encounter via the 10-day Tushita course, but many who encounter Buddhism who are inspired as much as you are, they kind of go for the route where they join a monastery, become ordained, and go for the Geshe degrees, like our teachers and many teachers that you know as well. Is that something you ever thought about, or did you always wanted to go for the practice first, like the Allen School is practice first and then the experiences come out of it? Or was it always like study and experiences and practice goes hand in hand?
Yeah. I think one of the great things about the different schools of Buddhism, not just Tibetan Buddhism, is the diversity of approaches and perspectives. And I think that's wonderful, because, you know, everyone's different and everyone has different inclinations and so forth. And so therefore, I think for those people who really want to embark on a lot of study and so forth, there is that avenue available to them, particularly within the Geluk school of Tibetan Buddhism. If they really want to become a monk or a nun, and they can study the Geshe program, but of course that'll take them 20 years of study, and of course in India, so the conditions in India maybe not suitable for everyone. So that is an option, but I think that's an option that's for relatively few people, actually, who would want to go that way. particularly in terms of becoming a monk or a nun. You know, often people ask me, well, have you ever been a monk? And I say no. And often I find beginners sort of have this thought that, well, actually, if I'm serious about Buddhism, I should become a monk or a nun, shouldn't I? And I think that's a mistaken way of thinking. Historically, in ancient India and ancient Tibet, that was probably true, actually, because in those eras, people struggled to survive. And becoming monk or a nun, because the culture was supporting that, automatically meant that you had a monastery or a nunnery to go to. All your financial needs were met. You'd be taken care of for the rest of your life. You get educated, fed, everything would be taken care of free of charge. And so you could then dedicate your life because those institutions were widely available in those cultures and supported by local communities. Unfortunately, in very few modern countries, there are a few Asian countries that sort of still exists a little bit, but certainly all the Western countries, there is not that infrastructure there. That one, there's not really many monasteries or nunneries available, and the very few that are often require even some sort of payment or at least some work to be able to go there. So it's the conditions to find those conditions in the modern world is quite rare and quite difficult to find. And then if you don't find yourself in a monastic community, becoming monk or nun can be very difficult in the modern world, because again, there's very little financial support. So often people who become monks or nuns in the modern world end up having to still work at some level to financially support themselves. And then they're often isolated on their own, and particularly if they're wearing the robes in public in societies or communities that are a little bit conservative, they may get actually some negative feedback on that. So actually, a lot of the advantages to becoming a monk or a nun that were there historically in ancient India and Tibet don't really exist in the modern world. So it's actually a tough gig being a monk or a nun in the modern world. But I think for some people, if they can find those places, those niches, then becoming a monk or a nun could be a good option for some people. But I think to a large extent, for most people in the modern world, that's probably not going to be the best path forward in terms of following a spiritual path.
These questions that I'm receiving from many people, actually, that I also, sort of like investigated within myself. How could you, as a layperson that doesn't have the, I don't know, the wish or for now anyway, to become a monk or a nun, how can you still learn and practice in a way in the same level without, well, when you don't have a lot of money to be able to dedicate your life to? If you have, I don't know, any practical advice on how you can do that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the same thing, is that whether you're monk, ordained or lay, that the institutions where you can study and practice and meditate and go on retreat, that you were quite prevalent historically, particularly in Tibet, simply don't exist in the modern world, because we don't have that sort of, we're not Buddhist countries, and so we don't have the society and community financially supporting all of these institutions. So it's very difficult for these sorts of institutions to survive in the modern world. I think we are finding, though, as Buddhism becomes more widely spread in many countries, I think we are now finding small pockets where this is starting to happen now, where we are finding more and more communities where you can do some study and retreat and so forth, and it can be affordable. But again, it's not widely available and it's not easy to find. But I think one of the things that will make it more easy for particularly a layperson, but also Sangha, is the virtual, the technology, the virtual training. I mean, of course, it's not the same as being physically in a community, residential, doing a course or retreat or so forth. But maybe it's a good halfway house that at least something is available to people who can't do that. I think you just mentioned the basic program in Jamyang, you know, it's been running. We've got a couple of hundred people who are following that online. And also, I think the program that Geshe Dorji Dundal's doing in Tibet House in Delhi. I mean, I think initially I heard there was like 500 or 600 people following that. I mean, maybe the numbers have dwindled down a little bit now, but, you know, so these sorts of things, I think, are much more, as technology improves and so forth, I think these sorts of things are becoming much more available. And I think you'll find that over the coming years, they'll become better and better and more effective in how they're presented and so forth, because I think it's all relative, the online stuff is relatively new. And I know from my own experience that certainly previously in the last, you know, maybe 5, 10, 20 years, any online programs were very limited in their effectiveness, often because lack of technology availability and so forth. It was really a not very effective way. But I think now with all this Zoom that we're doing now and all this ability to interact online, I think this could be the way forward for people, any people, whether they're Sangha, a lay or ordained, to really engage in meaningful education, meaningful practice and so forth, where there is not these institutions available where they can go there and engage in these activities in an affordable way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, as we had a conversation about it, and that, you know, one of the things that COVID in a way did in a good way, that things become so much online, then people have the ability to, you know, interact, because not everyone can come to the Dharamsala by person.
Exactly.
and stay here also and study, for instance. But the fact that we had those online programs has been really beneficial, I think, for many people. And including for me when I was stuck in Israel. So yeah, so that's very fortunate.
I'm not suggesting we replace residential with online, but I think that we can certainly improve the quality of training by adding a lot of online, which can make it accessible to those people who can't do a residential for whatever reason.
Glenn, so this next question is something that I get asked many times. So I live in a Hindu community and in a Hindu ashram where there's a lot of emphasis on yoga, Ayurveda, eating a good food, sleeping early, no sugar, exercising a lot, doing a lot of yoga. So they asked me that what is the Buddhist view on the body? That how do you look at the body? Is this something that you don't really value? Is that something, how do you look at it? And then from my mind comes to the quotes of Shanti Deva on how he looks at a body. For example, in his book, how he described the 9 holes you have of the body and look at everything that comes. Sorry? You have 9 holes in your body and see what comes out of it. And then I read another quote which says, treat your body as a slave and just go use this maximum to go forth in the path of Dharma. And I don't know if it's contradictory to the Hinduist view, because here they say honor your body, look at your body as a gift from divine. Where do Buddhist and the Buddhist school stands on looking at the body?
Yeah, of course, in Buddhism, we're talking about training the mind. So the mind is the focal point, because this is what's the source of happiness and source of suffering. But the body is the vessel for the mind. And so to support the mind effectively, we need to look after the body. And we need to be careful when we read things such as you mentioned from Shanti Deva to understand them correctly. I don't think Shanti Deva was saying we should denigrate the body, or, I mean, when he's not talking about engaging in ascetic practices of starving the body or anything like that. What he's suggesting, and this is very relevant in the modern world, is to not get caught up in glorifying the body in terms of I'm going to be a better person if my body is more beautiful. I mean, we see in the modern world how much money is spent on cosmetics and all this sort of, you know, Botox and all this sort of stuff. And so I think Shantideva is really talking about letting go of craving and attachment to the body. That's really what he's talking about. He's not talking about seeing the body as some sort of filthy thing, but he's trying to so we can have a healthy perspective of our body, that the body is a vessel for the mind, and that we're not going to get happy by doing a little bit of cosmetic surgery. That's not going to give us any genuine happiness. So therefore, from a Buddhist perspective, absolutely, we need to take care of our body. We need to exercise. We need to make sure we have a proper diet. We need to sleep well and all of these sorts of things. So yes, absolutely. Now, because Buddhism is all about mental training, then what we don't find a lot of extensive body work. Whereas in the yoga tradition, they're going through not so much the coarse body, but the subtle body. And so therefore, as part of the yoga tradition, we have all the asanas, which at the surface level are to make this body more flexible. But at a deeper level, it's to make sure that all the energies are flowing well in the body and so forth. And similarly in Buddhism, what we find is that when there is a lot of talk about the body, it comes in Tantra or Vajrayana level of practice. Then there's a lot of talk about body, particularly in what's called completion stage practices. And then there's a lot of emphasis in terms of working with not so much the coarse body, but the subtle body, because we need to have those energies flowing well in the subtle body, because that's the support for the mind. And so it becomes very crucial, particularly at the level of Tantra or Vajrayana practice, that we address the body, particularly the subtle body. But at the sort of a foundation level of the sutra level, then yes, we need to also take care of the body, have a healthy diet, make sure we get enough sleep and so forth. So that's very important.
So there's something that the center wanted to ask you as well, everyone in the cities and everyone who's been practicing for a long time. So one of the experiences, as you've described in your courses as well, so it's an up, down, up, down, up, down, but overall the graph is moving towards up if you will compare 5 years before and 5 years now. So there's a general sense of that, yes, we are moving towards a very relaxed state of mind, a very calm and serene state of mind. We are becoming more peaceful. However, as we move further, there's also a sense of missing that excitement and thrill. There's a sense of missing that adrenaline rush. So you don't like to party anymore. You don't like to wake up for late and go for those stuff that you used to go when you were a teenager or a young adult. But there's still a sense of missing those upsurges of excitement and thrill. I mean, I don't really know what my question is there, but but most of us, we go back to our tendencies because of this addiction to excitement, or like something that we want to.
Yeah. Of course, it's because our worldview is that the source of my happiness is out there. And of course, we're going to look for excitement and so forth, because that's our worldview, because that's what the modern world has told us and what we believe and lap up. And that's what the modern world is promoting. And they have to promote that, because then they'll be able to sell us things that we don't really need, that are very expensive, so they can make lots of money out of us. And that's the thing, is that we're chasing after those sensory pleasures because we think that they're going to make us happy. But actually, they don't make us happy. What happens is we get some little stimulus, some excitement, it's gone. And then we go to the other extreme of, oh, I'm bored, I'm depressed, I need more stimulus. So it's like taking heroin. First you take it, wow, great, boof, down. Oh, I need more. And what happens? Of course, we kill ourselves. And so that's what we do in the modern world with not just drugs and alcohol, but just stimulus in general. We're just stimulus junkies. And the more we get into that, the more we're going to crash to the other extreme, the more we're going to end up with anxiety and depression and so forth. And it's just a losing battle. In fact, it was very interesting. I saw a little experiment they did with, I think, mice or something, and they had them in cages where basically they were on their own in sterile cages, and then they had two feeders, one with, I think, just water and one with like cocaine or something. And of course the experiment was the mouse started taking the cocaine because it was living in this sterile environment on its own, so it basically OD'd and killed itself. I mean, that's what we're doing now in the modern world with stimulus, not necessarily drugs, but just stimulus in general. But then the person who was doing experiments says, look, that's the problem. But then the other experimenter said, no. And what he did was he built what was called a rat park. And so what he did was, instead of a steel sterile cage, he built this beautiful environment with lots of other mice or rats around. And basically, because of that, the mice hardly ever touched the cocaine. They just took the water because they had a different perspective. Instead of they needed all this stimulus, they were getting much more rewards from being around other people and so forth. And so I think this is the point here, is that, and this is often a misperception, is that now we are stuck in these two extremes, either excitement or depression, because both of those are coming from my happiness and suffering is coming from out there. And so we go boom, 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 backwards and forwards, and we never get anywhere. And what often the confusion is, or wrong way of thinking, is that by meditating, particularly like a shamatha practice where we calm the mind, is somehow people think, oh, I'm withdrawing. But that's not true. That's what we do now. When things are unpleasant, we withdraw. So either we get caught up or we withdraw. So meditation is not about withdrawing from stimulus. Meditation is about fixing our worldview, that by developing a calm, clear, focused mind, then we can see clearly the reality in front of us and clearly see that the source of happiness and suffering is not anywhere out there. It lies within our own mind. Then what will happen is we won't be stimulus junkies. We won't be chasing after stimulus, which means that actually, if something pleasant comes our way, we won't get caught up in craving and attachment. We'll actually enjoy it more than we do now, because now we have this sort of, I got to have it, agitated mind, this sort of excitement. And actually, we don't really enjoy it fully because of that. And then if we don't get it, we get frustrated. When it goes, we get upset and we get depressed. It's gone. My life is boring, meaningless. And so therefore, if we can, through meditation, shamatha, calm the mind, again, it's not about withdrawing, it's about calming the mind, focusing the mind, so then we can see what is the reality in front of us, to come to see the source of happiness and suffering is not out there. It lies within our own mind. Then we'll be like the rat in the rat park. We won't be chasing after the cocaine hit, because we'll know that that's not bringing us any happiness. So, and I think we sort of know this at a deep level in our life. The times where we truly were happy is not when we had some thrill. The times where we were truly happy is often when we did something for someone, or we saw someone receive something wonderful. It's when we give, That's when we're truly happy, not when we get. And in fact, another study I saw they did was they had two groups of people. At the beginning of the day, they gave everyone $100. One group had to spend the $100 on themselves, and the other group had to spend the $100 on others. And then at the end of the day, they sort of measured their level of happiness. And the group who had to spend the money on others were more happy than the ones who spent it on themselves. So I think this is where what we need to understand, because unfortunately, while we're stuck in these two extremes, that the source of happiness and suffering is out there, often the stimulus is overwhelming. And what then people mistakenly do is they use meditation as a way of withdrawing. I just withdraw into my little bubble of peace here. Then I don't have to deal with all of that out there. But this is not Buddhist meditation. This is an incorrect use of Buddhist meditation. It's not a matter of about withdrawing from the world. It's about engaging with a more healthy perspective in the world. So that's important, I think.
Yeah, so like it actually leads me for the next question, but also I wanted to ask, to add something. I mean, I've read recently and also heard about the fact that because we have the modern life sort of like emphasizing on the self-cherishing I have to be before everything and so on, and then you have this fear that if you give, you lose your eye or something like that. And I was wondering, what do you think about the fear factor that we sort of like? I also see it in Israel, how there is a way of like scaring you for doing what, for staying a certain direction that they want you to stay. And there is even an inner fear that you don't even understand and notice, but is there. And how, like, what do you think about this effect that we have in our life, also in the most subtle places? And do you have any tools of, maybe deal with this, because you said there is like healthy fear and an unhealthy fear. So if you can, just share a little bit light about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, unfortunately, in our modern world, in many cultures, there's this me first attitude, and it's actively pursued, me first, me first. And it seems like that's the necessary attitude if we want to be happy, that we have to do me first. And that even gets further enforced by when we see people who don't do the me first and do others first, and we see them suffering because they're trying to do others first. And we go, well, that really confirms I need to do me first, because here's a group of people trying to help others and they're suffering immensely. Again, this is a false view, is that with all things we do, we need wisdom and compassion. And so compassion is helping others. But we need to always add wisdom, because if we don't add wisdom, and we know from our own experience, if we try and help people, they'll take advantage of that, because it's not often that people help you. So then often when people get help, they go, wow, and they take advantage of that. And then we often feel like, and then we often let them do that, because we feel like compassion is about, smiling and saying nice things to people. But that's not compassion. Because if we let people take advantage of us, if we're trying to help them, this is not compassion. Because compassion is the wish or aspiration to help them to be free of suffering and its causes. And the causes are mental afflictions. And so if someone is trying to take advantage of you and you allow that, that's the opposite of compassion. So the compassionate thing to do is not tolerate that. Of course, we're not talking about it getting angry at the person or attacking the person. To still have compassion for the person, but be very forceful and say, I will not tolerate that behavior. That's not acceptable. And so therefore, it's important that when we do cherish others or help others, we always do that with wisdom. Because if we don't, it won't work. We'll get taken advantage of, we'll suffer, and then we think, wow, this compassion doesn't work. It really must be me first. That's the only way to go. I got to do the me first, because everyone around me is doing me first. So, I guess that's what I have to do. But the me first attitude just doesn't work. It just creates suffering for ourselves and for the people around us. So again, it all comes down to this false view of reality, that this idea that there is an independent me here and an independent objective world out there. And so this me first attitude at the deepest level, to overcome that, we need to really understand the Buddhist view of reality, this idea of emptiness, or the flip side of that is the idea of interdependency, that everything's interdependent. And so therefore, you know, there's no independent me here. There's no separation between myself and others, which means if suffering is arising, whether it's in this body or that body, equally the same. Let's just alleviate that suffering. But as long as there's this sort of me first attitude, then if it's suffering in this body, then I really care about that, because, you know, that's important. But in that body, well, if it's a friend, I might do something. If it's someone I don't know, or particularly if it's someone I don't like, then actually good. I hope they suffer because they deserve to suffer because they're such a horrible person. So again, I think the key to this is the wisdom, that we need to make sure that we always have wisdom in everything we do, because otherwise, if we're just trying to be nice, kind, compassionate people, people will take advantage of us and we'll suffer, and they'll just have even a stronger me first attitude. They'll exploit people even more. So this, I think, is the sort of the answer there. And of course, it's difficult because so many people around us are going in the opposite direction. And so it's going to be hard to move in the opposite direction, particularly if it's people close to you, your family members or people, friends and so forth, who are really moving that way. But I think that's where, you know, often I talk a lot about Sangha, spiritual community. And this is something very important. It's we need help, because as beginners in the spiritual path, we have a lot of bad habits. We're easily influenced by others. And it's very hard to change that on our own. And I know from my own experiences, you know, I mentioned earlier, I did these courses and went back to Australia, and I really wanted to transform my life. But where I went back to in Australia, there was no Buddhist center. There was no one interested in any of these sorts of things. And so even though I really wanted to meditate each day and transform my life and so forth, basically I just got swept up in my old habits. And basically for 2 years, nothing happened, nothing. And it was only, you know, I mentioned that then I went and did the master's program. Then I found myself in a spiritual community, in my case, in Italy, surrounded by like-minded people, that I managed to be able to begin to do something. To meditate, to transform my life, because I had some support there. I wasn't just swimming against the tide constantly all day, every day. And so I think this is something important, that no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, that if we really want to go against the tide of the modernity, then we need to get help. We need to find these people and get connected. And then we'll feel like, well, we're not the only one. I'm not crazy, you know, that, you know, I'm not the only one who thinks me first is not a good idea. There are other people. And so let's try and do something about that.
Yeah, I have to say that actually what's another thing that came out good from the Zoom and all of these possibilities, that people who don't live next to centers or have Sangha community around them, they can have a virtual community that supports them, and that is something that is really meaningful and important. Well,
exactly.
Okay, so
and also with the virtual community, I mean, it's not exactly the same as physical, but particularly if you're in a remote place, then, you know, you can have a Sangha, you can have a world Sangha, you know, people from all places in the world.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I have to say that was very supportive when I wasn't able to live next to a Sangha. And the other part of my question was regarding to, you know, shamatha and vipassana meditations, because it seems to be, you know, regardless to the whole, you know, mindfulness movement, even within the more how do you say, classic Buddhism, it seems to be that there is people who are more drawn to the shamatha, and there is less emphasis on the vipassana. Although I've heard His Holiness say more than once that you should combine those two things, because just shamatha is not enough, but you need it. So I was just wondering, where is your approach about it? What do you think?
I always emphasize an integrated approach, it's like if we want to have a healthy body, we need to have all the main food groups. It's not like just eating all the good healthy foods from one food group and leaving the other two food groups out. That doesn't work with a healthy body. Similarly, with a healthy mind, if we want to transform our mind, we need a balanced diet of practice. And so if we simply do shamatha, then it's very easy to become, as I mentioned before, to use shamatha as a way of withdrawing into my little bubble of peace here, so I don't have to deal with all that mess out there in the world. So that's not very helpful. And then similarly, the vipassana, a lot of people just do a vipassana, but without some shamatha, then we can do a lot of vipassana but not really get anywhere because our mind is just distracted and dull and so forth. And then if we just do the compassion thing, then people can take advantage of us and we suffer a lot and so forth. And then, of course, with all of those, they're the three main areas, but then supporting all of those three is our worldview. As long as our worldview is that the source of happiness and suffering is coming from out there, then probably we're not going to be interested in meditating at all, because what's that going to do for me in chasing after all my sense pleasures? Not going to help me at all. So I'll get rid of all of this stuff and I'll do the me first thing. So compassion's out the window. So shamatha, vipassana, compassion, get rid of that and let's just go for it. Let's just see how much pleasure I can get out of this life. So therefore, we need a balanced diet. And I think the first element, and this in Buddhism, this comes as the preliminary practices, is to understand we have a precious human life and it's not going to last forever, so that we take advantage of it and don't waste it chasing after lots of sensory pleasures. And then really on that basis come to see that the source of my happiness and suffering is not anywhere out there, it lies within my own mind. So that all comes within preliminary practices. If we don't engage in that, I think we're just going to chase after pleasure our entire life. We're not going to be interested in meditating or doing anything else. We're just going to waste our life. But if we do those preliminary practices effectively, understand we've got this precious opportunity, source of my happiness and suffering is within my own mind. How can I overcome the causes of suffering? How can I strive for genuine happiness? The first thing, I need to have a workable tool, shamatha. So I need to engage in shamatha practice to subdue this unruly mind, this distracted and dull mind, to make it a workable tool so I can transform my mind. So shamatha then on that basis of the view of genuine happiness, and then having a more stable and clear mind, then the two wings of practice of wisdom or vipassana and compassion practice. And so therefore engaging in those two practices. So we need to have an integrated approach covering all of those four areas. If we leave any one of those four areas out, we're going to find it very difficult to effectively move forward in our spiritual practice. So that's very important. And not just think, well, my mind is agitated and distracted, I'll just do shamatha practice. I think if you just do shamatha practice, it's not going to be very effective, because again, there's a danger then we'll just use it to withdraw from everything. I have a little bubble of peace here, I don't have to deal with all that crap out there now, and we'll become quite disconnected. And also we need help in our shamatha practice, because a lot of these mental afflictions are quite strong. So while we're engaging in shamatha practice, developing a more calm, clear and focused mind, we need to bring in some heavy artillery of loving kindness, compassion and vipassana to subdue those mental afflictions which are interfering with my shamatha practice, so that we can go deeper in shamatha practice, which means that my compassion practice will go deeper, my vipassana practice will go deeper, and they'll feed back into each other. So they'll all feed into each other, including the preliminary practices. So therefore, my recommendation, regardless of whatever spiritual path we are following, we need these four elements. We need first to have a healthy worldview. Where is source of happiness and suffering? On that basis, we need to train the mind. We need to calm and focus the mind with shamatha. And on that basis, we need to engage in wisdom and compassion. And I think you'll find in any valid spiritual tradition, we will have these four elements. Not just
thank you. It actually leads me to like another part of the question, but I see you started running out of time. So just if you have a short sort of like schedule for people who are working and living in cities and don't have the whole time to dedicate for meditation and practice, but what would you suggest for people who, you know, have families also, so they have to go to work and take care of the families? How would they, in your opinion, in a way, orchestrate their approach of being able to practice, but also be able to maintain their family lives and career?
Sure.
And then I will let Aman sort of like say the last thing before you can dedicate.
Again, as I've already mentioned, I think one very important thing is Sangha, spiritual community. If we just try and do it on our own, particularly if we have a busy life, a lot of job responsibilities, family responsibilities, and we try and do it on our own, I think we're not going to really get anywhere. It's too difficult because we get swept away in all of those things. So we need help. Does that mean we need to go and find a Buddhist center? No, but we need to find like-minded people trying to do something similar to us, get connected, support them, get them, and they can support us. So that's one key element. If your partner is like-minded, mini Sangha of two. Two's much better than one, because on days you're down, your partner can push you along a bit, and other days you can help your partner. So at least if your partner is doing something very similar, fantastic. And if you have a few more close friends that you can maybe get together occasionally, support each other, that was going to be almost essential. I would say essential. So without that, I think you're going to find it almost impossible. Second point is, again, as long as we feel the source of happiness is out there, we're going to spend all of our time and energy in working 50, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. If we do that, forget about spiritual path. It's not going to happen because all our time and energy is going to go there. So therefore, again, preliminary practices, precious human life. It's not going to last forever. And the source of genuine happiness lies within our own mind. We're not going to be more happy if we earn an extra so much 25% salary a year, or have a bigger house or a bigger car, or better holidays or so forth. In fact, studies show the more we earn, the more unhappy we become. If we have enough to satisfy our basic needs, that's all. If we go, the higher we go above that, studies show we generally become more unhappy, because we're having more expectation that that's going to make us happy, and it's not, and we get more depressed because of that. So therefore, we need to do these preliminary practices. We need to really understand this precious opportunity we got, and the source of happiness and suffering lies within our own mind. And then practices like shamatha, vipassana, and compassion is the gateway to genuine happiness. If we really understand that, then a lot of these things we fill up our day with that don't really bring us anything, we're going to lose interest in it. We're going to, and then we'll have time to meditate. Because often now I hear people say, oh, I'd like to meditate, but I don't have time. But that's never a valid excuse. Yes, usually people fill up their day with lots of activities, but a lot of these activities are not very useful. So yes, we have to work a certain amount to earn enough money and so forth, and some family responsibilities. But above and beyond that, we tend to fill up our day with lots of things that don't really bring us anything. And so these preliminaries will help us to let go of that. then we'll have time and energy to do some daily meditation, to work on developing ourselves and so forth. So this is the key. If we don't do these things, I think you'll find it's going to be extremely difficult.
So you said there are 4 practices: shamatha, vipassana, doing the prerequisites, and then the loving kindness practices. There is one more practice that Rinpoche and His Holiness himself gives a lot, which is doing prostrations, these many prostrations, or reciting mantras whole day. I've never really heard, excuse me if I have, but I've never really heard you talking about these mantra chantings a lot, doing these many japas per day. Where, just curious, where do you stand on it? Do you think it's beneficial, or do you think we should just do shamatha, vipassana, loving kindness practices?
Yeah. So what all the practices that I've mentioned are coming within the sutra level of practice, or the Mahayana, you might call. What you're talking about is the highest level of practice of Tantra or Vajrayana. And so to be able to effectively practice Tantra or Vajrayana, we need these basic practices, these basis practices, that unless we have done these basis practices of the preliminaries in terms of the view of genuine happiness, shamatha, vipassana, compassion, then we don't have really much of an effective basis for Tantra or Vajrayana, because to engage in Tantra or Vajrayana, we need bodhicitta, we need the view of emptiness, we need the wisdom of emptiness, and they come from these 4 elements of practice. So if we haven't got this as the foundation, then putting a lot of effort into Tantra or Vajrayana practice is not going to be very effective. Does that mean don't do any chanting mantras or anything like that now? No. If you have some connection with Tantra, great. And you have some commitment, good. Do your mantra recitation and so forth. But while you're doing that, put a lot of emphasis on these foundation practices, so that then your sadhana practice becomes more and more and more powerful. If you just do sadhana practice without shamatha, without vipassana, without compassion, without preliminaries, I think that you're not going to get very far. And I know friends who've been doing this for 30 years and not much has changed, and they'll admit that too, because in those days they didn't really understand what was necessary. But I think now it's a bit more clear. So yes, we can do sadhana practice because it can be very inspirational. We can do chanting mantras and so forth. But this, if we make this our single core practice and don't do the foundation, then I think you'll not get very far. You could, and in fact you can, incorporate some of these elements into your sadhana practice. You can incorporate times in your sadhana practice where you stop and you rest and you do shamatha, you dissolve into emptiness, do some vipassana, you send out some light and so forth. You can do compassion and so forth. So you can build in these elements into the sadhana practice. But if you're simply mindlessly chanting mantras and sending out light and so forth, I think that's not going to be very effective.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have one last question, which is something that we've asked as a first questions to others, but for some reason we kept it in the last. So it's in the light of the current times. We're going through COVID. And as you said, there's an economic crisis. There's also a mental health crisis. We realized that more than the COVID virus, the suicide virus and the depression and the anxiety virus might be much bigger.
Sure. And understandable. And I think and of course there is a lot of financial stress and so forth on many people, but that is magnified many-fold because we have the view that the source of my happiness is there. And so therefore, with that view, together with these difficult situations, then of course there's going to be a lot of anxiety, fear, depression, and so forth. The situation is difficult, yes, but if we understand that the source of happiness and suffering is not out there, it's in here, then instead of turning that difficult situation into some big, huge problem that's insurmountable and having a lot of fear and anxiety and depression and then actually not being able to deal effectively with the situation, we can understand that it's a difficult situation. And here's an opportunity for me to develop as a person, to challenge me to work through this difficult situation. And of course, any difficult situation is impermanent. It's not going to last forever. This too shall change. But to take that difficult situation as an opportunity, and if we look at our lives, the times where we most developed as a person is often when we're challenged, when we're faced with difficulties. And so therefore see these difficult situations as a challenge to, and then often we, and I think Maya touched on this point earlier, is that we are stuck in certain way of doing things. And suddenly that's sort of shaken. And so then now we're not sort of stuck in that. And now we can think a bit broader and go, well, hang on, I can do this, this, and this, and this. So often these difficult situations are the precursor to some wonderful change in our life. And I see this a little bit, I saw a little bit happening in Australia, but I think in other countries as well. You see these people, often people who have a lot of hardship, and they're going out and helping the neighbor, doing shopping for the neighbor who's a high risk person, or giving some money or giving something to other people in the community. So you see a lot of these wonderful things happening, and often the people who are doing it don't have a lot of things, but they feel like, well, I'm not as bad off as these other people. Let me see if I can help do something in the community. And so again, if we can have this perspective, not about what we can get, but what we can bring, what we can give, then I think we won't get so overwhelmed by these difficult situations. And then actually it could be a catalyst to change our life in a big positive way.
That's all from me. Maya, do you want to use some of our time with Glen? I mean, I wish we could ask 10, 20 more questions, really. Maya, do you want to say something?
Yes. Yeah, first of all, I'm doing the gallery review again, just to say from the both of us, thank you so much, Glen. I know that we're running out of time, but really it's been very, as usual, very interesting and very good to hear those things, even if we've heard them before in some of the cases, but just to refresh it, because sometimes I see how also for myself, when times are more hard, you tend to forget those things that you've learned and heard about before. So thank you so much for, the opportunity that you gave us to hear those things, and it's really beneficial. And also I want to thank you, Aman, for
thank you, Maya.
Yeah, giving us the opportunity to do that through Choe Khor Sum Ling. And before we give you the opportunity to dedicate, and unless someone you have something more to add, I want to say thank you so much. And I hope we see each other virtually or like in face-to-face in the near future.
Yes, thank you, Maya.
With or without this corona.
Thank you, Aman. Well, I think for dedication, we can't go past Shanti Deva. So I've got Shanti Deva dedication prayer. Can someone make me like co-host so I can share my screen? Because I've got the Shanti Deva dedication prayer here somewhere. Where is it? There it is. So let's do the dedicate this session using Shanti Deva dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are warm with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we
Hope
hope to see you
to
again.
be back
Thank
in
you so
India
much.
again in the not too distant future. Let's see what next year brings.
Hopefully
Thank
so.
you.
Thank you
Thank you,
so,
Glen.
so much, Glenn,
Thank
again.
you.